The airport was crowded and noisy that morning, filled with people rushing to catch flights or waiting in long lines. In the middle of all this, a man walked in quietly, wearing a hoodie, jeans, and a cap pulled low over his eyes. He carried only a small black duffel bag. No flashy clothes, no bodyguards, no attention. Most people didn't recognize him, and that was how he liked it. He didn't walk like a celebrity, didn't act important. Just moved like someone trying to get from one place to another. But this man was Keanu Reeves, one of the most famous actors in the world. He just didn't look like the image people had seen on movie screens. He looked tired, peaceful, like someone who had seen a lot and was okay staying silent. He went to sit down near gate 27, where people were waiting for their delayed flight. He looked around, saw a lot of tired faces, crying babies, and angry passengers. In one corner, an old woman was standing because there were no more empty seats. She had a small cane and a heavy bag, and nobody seemed to notice her. Keanu stood up immediately and walked over to her. "Please, take my seat," he said gently, and helped her carry the bag. The woman thanked him with a smile and sat down. He didn't wait for praise or talk about it. He just walked away and leaned against a pillar nearby. That's when a group of loud young passengers noticed him. They were laughing and joking loudly, not because they were mean, but just careless. One of them saw Keanu standing alone, dressed simply, and said, "Look at that guy, he looks homeless." Another one laughed and added, "He's probably sleeping in the airport, hiding from security." They thought it was funny, but they didn't know who they were making fun of. Keanu didn't respond, didn't even turn his head. He just stood there quietly, waiting for his flight, but the noise and laughter caught the attention of a nearby airport security guard. One of the passengers said as a joke, "Hey, there's a suspicious guy over there. Maybe you should check him out." The security guard looked over and saw a man leaning against the wall, hands in pockets, looking calm but quiet. He called his partner, and the two began walking toward Keanu. They didn't run, but they walked with purpose, with that serious look that meant this might be trouble. Keanu noticed them coming, but didn't move. He understood this might happen. He had dealt with things like this before. Still, he waited and stayed calm. The officers reached him and asked, "Sir, can we see some ID?" Keanu nodded politely and said, "Sure," while reaching into his bag slowly. But maybe the movement was too slow, or the officers were already too tense. One of them stepped back slightly and raised his voice. "Stop. Keep your hands where we can see them." All passengers nearby stopped talking and turned to look. Some pulled out phones and started recording. Not knowing what was going on, Keanu raised both hands slowly and said in a calm voice, "I'm just getting my wallet," but it didn't matter. The younger officer, probably nervous or unsure, panicked. In a flash, he pulled his taser and fired. Keanu dropped to the ground as the electricity shocked through his body. He didn't cry out or scream. He just fell with a soft grunt and lay still. Gasps filled the air, and the crowd went silent. A few people rushed forward, but the other officer held them back. Everyone was confused, shocked, and unsure what had just happened. This wasn't just some fight or airport drama. This felt wrong. Then, someone shouted from behind the desk, "What are you doing?" "That's Keanu Reeves." The cops looked down at the man they had just tased and suddenly went pale. They hadn't recognized him, hadn't expected a Hollywood actor to be dressed like a regular person. But it was too late. The mistake had already happened. People in the crowd began whispering, "Is that really him, Keanu? What just happened?" And slowly, the truth began to spread across the terminal. They hadn't just tased any man. They had tased someone known for being kind, respectful, and gentle. Someone who gave up his seat just moments ago to an old woman, and now he was on the floor because no one had looked closely enough to see who he really was. The moment was powerful. heavy with silence and guilt. No one knew what would happen next. But one thing was clear. This wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning of something that would soon shock the whole world. The officers stood over Keanu, confused and shocked by what had just happened. The man they had just tased wasn't fighting back, wasn't shouting, wasn't angry. He was calm. Even though his body was shaking from the electric shock, he slowly moved his hand and placed it flat on the floor, trying to push himself up. One officer quickly stepped forward, saying, "Sir, please stay down." Keanu stopped, nodded once, and waited. Showing no signs of resistance, the younger officer, the one who had used the taser, looked nervous now. He hadn't expected this. Not from someone so quiet, so respectful. Passengers nearby began to whisper more loudly. "That's Keanu Reeves," someone said again. This time, with more certainty, another person stepped forward and said, "Hey, what are you doing? That's not some criminal." The older officer turned to the crowd and said, "Please stay back. This is a security matter." But the tension was growing, and more people were recording on their phones. The noise level rose as more people realized what had happened. "I know that guy. He's the actor from John Wick." One teenager shouted, others nodded and said, "Yeah, he's the one who always helps people." Still on the floor, Keanu looked up and said softly, "It's okay. I was just trying to get my ID." His voice was calm, but the pain was still in his eyes. He didn't seem angry, just disappointed and tired. The officers helped him sit up and asked again, "Can you show us some ID now?" Keanu nodded and reached into his bag carefully, this time slower than before. He pulled out his wallet and handed over his driver's license. One officer looked at it and his eyes widened. It was real. This was Keanu Reeves. No doubt, the younger officer took a step back and said, "Oh no. I didn't know." Keanu gave him a small smile and said, "You were just doing your job. I get it." But the crowd didn't take it so lightly. Some were shouting now, saying it was wrong, that the officers had gone too far. One woman cried out, "You tased a man for standing there doing nothing." Another said, "This is what happens when you judge people by their clothes." The officers looked more and more uncomfortable, not knowing what to say. Then an airport staff member came running, holding her phone. "I just called my manager. He says get Mr. Reeves to the lounge now. He's a VIP." The officer stood aside as the staff member helped Keanu stand up. He moved slowly, clearly still sore from the taser, but he didn't complain as he walked. Someone in the crowd offered him a bottle of water. He accepted it with a nod and said, "Thank you." Everyone could feel the quiet respect in his voice. Even after being mistreated, the airport manager arrived just moments later. Out of breath, he ran over and apologized again and again, saying, "We had no idea, Mr. Reeves." Keanu just said, "It's all right. Just maybe teach your team to look a little deeper next time." The manager promised he would, swearing to retrain the entire security staff. Still, Keanu didn't ask for special treatment, didn't yell, didn't demand anything. He simply asked, "Is the woman I gave my seat to okay?" She needed to sit. Everyone was surprised. Again, he wasn't thinking about himself at all. He was still thinking about helping others. The old woman from earlier came forward, looking worried. She said, "I'm so sorry, young man. You were so kind to me." Keanu smiled and said, "No need to be sorry, ma'am. I'm just glad you're all right." She touched his arm gently and whispered, "You didn't deserve this." More people came forward, some to apologize, some just to offer support. Keanu thanked each one. Softly, humbly, with no trace of pride, the younger officer stood off to the side. His face pale, he had realized how badly he had messed up, and it showed. But Keanu walked up to him before leaving and said, "I know it's easy to be scared sometimes, especially in a place like this. The officer didn't know what to say, but nodded slowly. Keanu added, "Fear can make us act too fast. Just remember to breathe next time." The officer whispered, "I'm sorry," and Keanu said, "I know. It's okay." With that, Keanu walked toward the VIP lounge with the staff member. The crowd moved aside for him, not because he demanded it, but out of respect. People clapped quietly, some even wiping tears from their eyes. It wasn't just that he was a famous actor. It was because he showed what real kindness and calm looked like even under pressure. Even when wrongly accused and hurt, he stayed human, and that left everyone at the airport thinking about what just happened. Not just the officers, but themselves too. As Keanu slowly stood with the help of the airport staff member, the air around him was full of silence and regret. People stopped walking, stopped talking, and just stared. The quiet man who had helped an old lady minutes ago was now the center of attention, and not because he wanted to, but because something wrong had just happened in front of everyone. The officers stood still, their hands awkwardly at their sides, not knowing what to do. The younger one looked down, guilt on his face, while the older one quietly gave back Keanu's ID. A small crowd had gathered, whispering, pointing, filming, and asking questions. Is that really him? Someone said, "That's Keanu Reeves, the movie star." Then something unexpected happened. People started speaking up. One airport cleaner, wearing a blue uniform and pushing a mop, walked forward and said, "He helped me once at LAX. Didn't even know who he was. Just helped me pick up my cleaning cart when it tipped." Others began joining in, as if a wave of truth was rising from the crowd. A woman holding a toddler said, "He gave my daughter his snack once. Just smiled and walked away before I could thank him." Another man said, "That's him. That's how he is. Always helping. Never showing off." The atmosphere was changing fast, from confusion to awe, from judgment to respect. The younger officer heard these stories and stepped back again. His face turned red, his hands clenched, and he looked like he wished he could disappear. He had just tased one of the kindest, most humble people alive. Everyone knew it, but Keanu didn't show anger, didn't raise his voice, didn't demand anything. Instead, he sat down slowly on one of the empty benches and took a deep breath. He looked around and said softly, "I'm all right. Please, let's not turn this into a fight." But it was too late to stop what had already begun. People were posting videos online, sharing what they had just witnessed. The words "Keanu Reeves tased at airport" began spreading across social media like wildfire. Comment sections filled up fast. People were angry, shocked, sad, and full of respect. Some wrote, "Only Keanu would be so calm after this." Others said, he forgave them, even though he didn't have to. His fans were heartbroken, and strangers became new admirers just by seeing how he handled the pain. Meanwhile, back at the terminal, more people gathered. Not to yell or argue, but to share. A young airport employee brought a printout of a photo from a few months ago. It showed her standing with Keanu at a bookstore nearby. She said, "He came in alone, bought some books for kids, and asked if I could recommend any. I didn't know it was him until he paid and left a big tip," she added, her voice shaking a little. Another man, maybe in his 50s, said he once helped push my broken-down car off the road. I didn't even realize it was him until later. One by one, these small, powerful stories came out not from magazines or interviews, but from real people. All these moments painted a clear picture. Keanu wasn't just a movie star. He was a man who quietly helped, who gave without asking anything in return. And now that same man was sitting on a bench in pain because someone judged him too fast. The truth hit hard. It hit everyone. The officer who tased him couldn't hold it anymore. He walked over slowly, his head lowered, and said, "Mr. Reeves, I didn't know," I thought. Keanu looked up, his eyes soft, and interrupted gently. "You thought I was a threat." The officer nodded, still unable to meet his eyes. "I was scared," the officer admitted. "You moved your hand too fast." "I reacted." Keanu gave him a long look and said, "It's fear. It makes people act without thinking sometimes." There was no anger in his tone, just truth. "Just don't let it happen again to someone else," he added. And the officer nodded slowly. Tears in his eyes, the manager of the airport arrived. Minutes later, already briefed about the situation. He walked over, apologizing over and over, offering the VIP lounge, food, anything Keanu needed. But Keanu said, "I don't need anything. I'm fine. Just maybe talk to your team about how to read people, not just their clothes." That line hit deep because everyone watching knew he was right. The world often judged people based on how they look, how they dress, not who they really are. As Keanu stood up again, slowly, this time the old lady he had helped earlier came toward him. She had tears in her eyes and said, "I'm sorry. All you did was help me." Keanu gently touched her shoulder and replied, "You needed help." That's all that mattered. The simplicity of his words made many people emotional. Here was a man hurt, embarrassed, judged, and yet still full of peace. That's what made him different. And that's what made this moment unforgettable. For everyone who saw it, the truth about who he was had finally come out, not through drama, not through news, but through kindness, forgiveness, quieted strength in the middle of pain. And those who watched it happen would never look at him the same way again. Keanu sat quietly on the bench, holding the bottle of water someone had given him. His hands were still shaking a little from the taser shock, but he tried to hide it. People watched him from a distance. Nobody wanted to bother him. But there was something about the way he sat there, calm and kind, that pulled everyone closer. The airport manager stood nearby, nervously looking at Keanu. He didn't know how to fix what had happened, so he asked gently, "Mr. Reeves, would you like medical help? Maybe a wheelchair?" Keanu looked up, gave a small smile, and said, "No thank you. I just need to sit a while." Despite the pain, Keanu never asked for help for himself. Instead, he looked around and asked, "Is the old woman I helped earlier still okay?" The manager blinked, surprised. "You mean the one you gave your seat to?" Keanu nodded slowly. "She needed to rest. I just want to make sure she's all right." Someone went to find the woman, and soon she walked over with a kind smile. "I'm here, dear," she said, holding his arm. "I should be the one worried about you." Keanu smiled. "Good. Then I can relax now." Around them, the mood in the terminal had completely changed. People weren't just curious anymore, they were inspired. Many of them had seen the taser incident and expected shouting, anger, or even police action, but instead, they saw a man who forgave everyone and asked only about someone else's well-being. It was the kind of behavior people only read about in books, but here it was, real and in front of their eyes. A young nurse, traveling to visit family, stepped forward and gently knelt beside Keanu. "I'm a nurse," she said softly. "You don't look well. May I check your pulse?" Keanu nodded, and she checked his wrist, frowning slightly. "You're still shaking." "That taser wasn't a small thing," she said. "I've had worse on set." Keanu joked quietly, making her smile, but even the nurse could see he was tired, maybe more emotionally than physically. She offered to sit with him until he felt better, and he said, "Thank you. I'd like that." The crowd grew quieter as they watched this moment. No flashing cameras, no reporters, just real people showing real care. And Keanu, despite being the one hurt, didn't act like a victim. He spoke gently to the nurse, thanked everyone who came by, and never once raised his voice. One man walked over holding a coffee and offered it to him. Keanu accepted it with a grateful nod and said, "That's kind of you." The man replied, "You've been kind your whole life." The least we can do is return it." Behind the crowd, the young officer who had tased him stood watching. He looked torn, ashamed of what he had done, but unsure how to fix it. Keanu noticed him and gave a small nod, as if to say, "It's okay." The officer walked away slowly, needing space to think. He had never felt so small in his life, not because someone yelled at him, but because someone didn't. Meanwhile, people began sharing their own little stories about Keanu. "He gave me his umbrella once," said a woman, and walked off. "In the rain, he waited in line like everyone else at my food stall," said a man. "Never said a word about being famous. He sat with my brother at a bus stop just because he looked lonely," said another. These weren't movie stories, they were small, quiet moments that people remembered forever. And now the world was seeing the man behind the screen, the real Keanu. A child, more than 6 years old, walked up to Keanu. Holding a small teddy bear, she looked nervous but brave and said, "You can hold my teddy if you're sad." Keanu looked at her, his eyes soft, and gently took the teddy in his hand. "Thank you," he said. "You're very kind." The child smiled and ran back to her mother, proud and happy, and just like that, hearts melted once again, because even a child could see something special in this man. Keanu looked around and finally said, "I think I'm okay now." He stood slowly, with the nurse helping him steady his steps. The manager offered again to take him to the VIP lounge. Keanu looked around and said, "Only if the old woman can come too. She's tired, and she deserves comfort." The woman gasped, touched deeply, and Keanu added, "No one should be forgotten while waiting." As they walked together, people clapped quietly, not like they would for a star but for a good man. There were no flashing lights, no reporters pushing in, just respect. Felt deeply in everyone's heart. People watched him walk away and knew they had just seen something rare. Not a hero from a film, but a real-life hero. Someone who stayed kind in a moment of pain and reminded the world that quiet goodness is more powerful than loud fame. As Keanu and the old woman were taken toward the VIP lounge, the airport returned to normal slowly, but something had changed. People were still whispering, still sharing videos and photos of what had happened, but now it wasn't just about the shocking moment of the taserette was about who Keanu really was. A quiet man who helped others, forgave quickly, and never made things about himself inside the lounge. He refused special treatment. He asked that the old woman be given a comfortable seat, warm tea, and a snack before he even sat down. The staff followed his request quickly, and she smiled with gratitude. Keanu then took the seat next to her. Still quiet, still calm, still thinking more about others than himself. Outside the lounge, more people had gathered in the terminal, not to stare, but to speak, to share stories they had been holding in for years. A janitor in a green uniform stood near the coffee stand and finally spoke up. "2 years ago, I was mopping the floors at another airport," he said. "I dropped my bucket and the water spilled everywhere. Everyone walked around or gave me angry looks. Except for one man," he pointed toward the lounge. "That man helped me clean it up without saying who he was." He paused and said, "That man was Keanu Reeves." Next, a young woman with glasses spoke up. "I was working in a bookstore in New York," she said, "and he walked in wearing a mask and a hat. I didn't know it was him until he asked me to recommend a book for kids who don't like reading. He bought 5 books and left quietly. An hour later, I realized he was famous. But he didn't act like a celebrity. He acted like someone who wanted to help a child learn." People listened closely now, more curious about Keanu the person than Keanu the actor. Another story came from a mother who had her baby in her arms. She said, "I was outside a shelter on a rainy day with my child crying. A man handed me a warm blanket, said nothing, and walked away. I never knew who he was until today. When I saw him tased in front of me," her voice broke a little, and others nodded, feeling her emotion. She added, "It wasn't right what happened to him, but maybe now people will really see who he is." As more passengers came forward, their words began to build a full picture. Keanu wasn't someone who helped just once or twice. He did it all the time, always quietly, always without asking for thanks. Even people who had only seen him in passing said the same thing. He smiled, he listened, he waited in line, he said, "Thank you." Simple things, yes. But in today's world, not everyone does them. Especially not celebrities who are often surrounded by guards and flashing cameras. One teenager pulled out his phone and showed a photo he had taken a year ago. It was blurry, taken from a distance, but in it, Keanu was seen helping a street musician fix a broken guitar string, the teen said. "I was too shy to talk to him, but I never forgot that moment." He didn't do it for attention, he did it because he cared. That small story went viral within minutes after being posted. People commented, "That's so Keanu, he's always been this way. Kindness, in silence, eh." Woman in her 60s also stepped forward and said, "I was a nurse during COVID one day. Keanu sent a huge food order to our hospital. No cameras, no press, just food with a small note. Thank you for what you do." He didn't even sign it, but we knew it was him. Her eyes filled with tears as she finished. "That's the man you tased today." The officers who had been involved stood silently nearby, hearing all of it. The younger one, especially, looked crushed by guilt. He had judged a man by his quiet appearance, and now, all he could hear were stories of a hero in plain clothes. He whispered to his partner, "I thought I was keeping people safe, but I hurt someone who was already protecting others in his own way." A small girl tugged at her father's shirt and said, "Daddy, is that the man who helps people?" Her father nodded, and she said, "He's like a superhero without a cape." That simple sentence hit everyone around deeply, because it was true. Keanu didn't need fame, or power, or a costume to be special. He was already showing the world how one person can make a difference with just kindness. In the lounge, Keanu leaned back in the chair and sipped his tea slowly. The old woman beside him said, "You're something special, young man." He smiled and replied, "I'm just trying to make the day a little easier for someone." And with that, he looked out the window, away from the cameras, not wanting applause, not wanting attention, just hoping people would be kind to each other, because that's what truly mattered. And that's how the man the world nearly tased and forgot became a symbol of something greater. Kindness without limits. Goodness without noise. The next morning, the airport incident was everywhere on the internet. Millions of people across the world had seen the video. A quiet man wrongly tased. And not just any man, Keanu Reeves, the actor known for his kindness. People were shocked, angry, confused, and deeply moved. But what made it go truly viral wasn't the taser, it was how Keanu reacted. No yelling, no anger, no lawsuits, just calm words, kindness, and forgiveness. That was the part people couldn't stop talking about. The video started with a shaky phone camera showing the moment Keanu stood with his hands up. Then the taser sound and Keanu dropping to the floor. Then came the gasps, the whispers, "That's Keanu Reeves." But what came next made the video powerful. Keanu sitting up, saying softly, "It's okay. I was just trying to get my ID." That one sentence melted hearts around the world. Within hours, hashtags like hashtag justice for Keanu and hashtag humble hero were trending. News channels picked up the story. Reporters repeated the same sentence. Actor Keanu Reeves shows the world how to respond with peace. Interviews with airport witnesses were played again and again. The janitor who shared how Keanu once helped him clean spilled water. The mother who said Keanu gave her his jacket outside a shelter. the bookstore girl who remembered him buying books for kids. All these stories added to the image of a man who never needed a spotlight. But now, the world had given him one. Late-night talk shows opened their shows with jokes about airport security, but those jokes quickly turned serious as they praised Keanu's calm reaction. One host said, "If I were tased in public, I'd be screaming for lawyers." Keanu just asked if the old woman was okay. Audiences clapped. Not because of his fame, but because of his humanity. People began searching for more stories about him, and they found them so many small acts of kindness that had never been told before. Keanu giving up his seat on subways, Keanu sitting and eating lunch with homeless people, Keanu paying for a stranger's college tuition in secret, Keanu carrying crew members' gear on movie sets when no one was watching. Each story made the world love him more. Not because he was a movie star, but because he was real. Even big celebrities began tweeting about it. Famous actors said, "We've all met Keanu. He's the real deal." One director posted, "He shows up early, stays late, helps the team, and thanks every single person." The world was listening and learning. But through all of this, Keanu stayed silent. No interviews, no social media posts, no press conference. He just went back to his quiet life. He didn't want to talk about the airport. He didn't want anyone punished. He just wanted people to treat each other better. Still, people couldn't stop talking. In schools, teachers showed the video to explain kindness and forgiveness. In workplaces, managers said, "Be like Keanu." On buses and trains, strangers smiled at each other more. Because one man reminded them that goodness still exists. A few days later, the airport released an official statement. They apologized to Keanu and thanked him for his grace. It's promised to improve staff training, especially in how to handle situations calmly. They also confirmed that both officers involved had volunteered for retraining. Not because they were forced, but because they wanted to do better. The younger officer, the one who had tased Keanu, also made a small public post. He wrote, "I judged a man too fast. I thought I was doing my job, but I let fear control me." He added, "Mr. Reeves taught me something that day not with words, but with how he carried himself. He didn't hide his mistake. He learned from it, and people respected that. Some even messaged him, saying, 'It takes strength to admit you were wrong.'" Even more surprising, a local artist created a mural on the side of a building near the airport. It showed Keanu sitting on a bench, holding the little teddy bear a child had given him. Above the picture, the words, "Kindness is power," were written in big, bold letters. People came from other cities to see it, take photos, and leave flowers, not for a celebrity, but for a man who reminded the world how powerful, calm, and kindness can be. One of the most shared posts was a screenshot of Keanu saying, "Fear makes people act too fast. Just remember to breathe." It became a quote on posters, wallpapers, and even school notebooks. Because it was simple, but it said everything in a world full of noise, anger, and quick judgment. Keanu's quiet response had become louder than any headline. He didn't fight back with force. He didn't scream for justice. He simply stood tall with calm words, soft eyes, and a forgiving heart. And because of that, millions of people began thinking, if he can forgive like that, maybe we all can try to be a little more like him, not just today, but every day. The young officer who had tased Keanu Reeves couldn't sleep for nights. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Keanu's calm face. Not angry, not shouting, just quietly asking, "Is the old lady okay?" That moment kept playing again and again in his mind. He had made a mistake, a big one, and he knew it. He hadn't seen a kind man. He had seen a threat just because someone looked simple, quiet, and different. Now the whole world had seen what he had done, and he didn't want to hide from it. But he also didn't want to be remembered as the officer who tased a good man. He wanted to learn, to to grow, and most of all to say sorry, so he reached out through the airport manager and asked to meet Keanu. He didn't expect Keanu to say yes, but he wanted to try. A day later, he received a message. Keanu said he'll meet you at a small coffee shop. No cameras, no reporters. The officer was surprised. He thought Keanu would avoid him forever. But now he had the chance to face the person he had hurt and maybe make it right. The meeting happened quietly. At a small cafe near the city, Keanu arrived on foot, alone, wearing his usual simple clothes. The officer stood up as he came in, nervous, sweaty, heart racing. Keanu walked in slowly, nodded once, and said, "Hello." They both sat down, and for a moment, no one said anything. The officer then took a deep breath and said, "I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry for what I did that day." Keanu looked at him, kind but serious, and asked, "Why did you do it?" The officer replied honestly, "I was scared. I thought something was wrong. You looked quiet. Your bag was in your hand, and I panicked." Keanu nodded slowly and said, "Fear is a strong thing. It can make good people do bad things." The officer looked down and said, "I've been beating myself up every day. I keep thinking, what if you had been badly hurt? What if you weren't someone strong enough to stay calm?" Keanu paused for a moment and then said, "You didn't know who I was? That's okay. But you didn't see the human in front of you. That's what matters." The officer nodded again, now with tears in his eyes. "I was wrong," he said. "Not just because you're famous. Even if you were just a normal man. I should have seen your eyes, your body language. I should have paused." Keanu gently said, "That's what I hope change, not just for me, but for everyone who gets judged too quickly." He leaned forward and added, "Use this mistake to do better. Learn, teach others. Make sure the next person you meet isn't hurt because of fear." The officer promised he would. And he meant it. After the meeting, the officer didn't go silent. Instead, he joined a volunteer group that worked with young officers in training. He told them his story not to make himself look good, but to show what not to do. He explained how he had misjudged someone based on silence, clothing, and fear, and how that mistake helped him see the truth, that every person deserves a pause, a second to be seen for who they really are. Not for what they wear or how they move, but for the soul behind the eyes. The story of their meeting spread quietly, but it inspired many. Police departments shared it as a lesson in emotional control. News channels reported it as a moment of real growth. One article called it the day kindness taught the law, and it wasn't just about Keanu anymore. It was about changing the way people react, how one mistake, met with forgiveness instead of anger, became a path to something better. People online praised Keanu even more after learning he had met the officer. Only he could forgive like that. Someone tweeted, "He doesn't just act in movies, he teaches us how to live." Another post said, "But Keanu didn't post anything, didn't share photos, didn't seek praise. He just went back to his usual life, quiet, kind, and full of heart." One day, a reporter managed to ask him about the meeting. Keanu smiled softly and replied, "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after." That sentence became another quote people started printing on shirts, posters, and sharing online. The officer who once felt broken now stood tall, not because he became a hero, but because he accepted his wrong, learned from it, and decided to be better. And all of that happened because one man chose kindness instead of anger. That moment taught everyone watching that forgiveness can heal more than punishment ever will. That real strength is staying calm when you're hurt, and that one act of grace can turn a mistake into a message for the world. Keanu didn't need revenge. He gave something far more powerful: understanding, and in doing so, he changed one man's heart. And maybe helped change many more after that. A week after the airport incident, things seemed to return to normal. Flights were on time. Passengers hurried from gate to gate, but something small had changed, something important at gate 27. Where it all happened, people now walked a little slower. They looked around more, noticed others, and sometimes even offered their seats. It wasn't because they were told to, but because of what they had seen. Keanu Reeves had left something behind, not his fame, not his money, but a message. The airport staff decided to do something special. They placed a small, simple wooden bench near gate 27. It had soft cushions and a brass plaque on the back. The plaque read, "The kindness seat, in honor of the man who reminded us to see with our hearts." It didn't mention Keanu's name, but everyone knew who it was for. And that made it more powerful. People started taking quiet photos with the bench not for social media attention, but to remember what it meant. Some sat on it just to think. Others left small notes, flowers, or even children's books. One note said, "Thank you for showing us the right way." Another said, "For the man who stayed calm when the world wasn't." The airport janitor who had once shared his story about Keanu cleaning up spilled water was the first to sit on the bench. He cleaned around it with care every day. Sometimes he would pause and whisper, "Still helping people, huh?" And he smiled. Because he knew Keanu would never ask for attention, but he deserved every bit of respect. In another corner of the airport, a group of security staff began a new training program. It was created after the incident, led by the officer who had once made the mistake. He now used his story to teach new officers to slow down, observe, and think before acting. He even started every class with the same sentence: "Fear can make you act fast, but kindness makes you act right." The officer no longer hid from his past. Instead, he used it to become better and help others do the same. Many officers respected him more now. Not because he was perfect, but because he had the courage to admit when he was wrong, and the heart to fix it. As for Keanu, he never spoke publicly about the incident. He didn't write a post, give an interview, or blame anyone. He simply went back to his quiet life. Still traveling with his small bag, still wearing the same hoodie and jeans, still helping strangers in small ways. No one noticed unless they were really watching. But people were watching now closer than before. Not just watching him, but watching themselves in schools. Teachers told the story of the airport, not as gossip, but as a real-life lesson in kindness, patience, and respect. Students wrote essays titled, "What Would Keanu Do?" and won. School even painted a mural of the scene with the words, "Kindness doesn't need a stage." A little girl who had given Keanu her teddy bear that day became a small star in her town. Her mother said she saw someone hurt and gave what she could. People said she learned from Keanu, but the mother smiled and said, "We all did." Even in homes far away, the story reached people's hearts. A man in Canada wrote that he had been angry for years, but this story made him cry. A woman in Japan said she showed the video to her elderly mother, who now asks about Keanu every day. An officer in Brazil shared the story with his team, saying, "This is how we should act, this is how we grow." And all this because of one moment, one man, and one choice. Keanu could have shouted, could have sued, could have ruined careers. But instead, he chose peace. He chose to forgive, not because it was easy, but because it was right. One evening, a boy waiting at gate 27 saw an old man standing nearby. Without thinking, he stood up and said, "You can sit here." The old man smiled and said, "Thank you, young man." A woman watching from a distance whispered to her daughter, "Kindness is still alive, you see. It spreads." That's how Keanu's story lived on, not through headlines, but through quiet actions, gentle words, and hearts that remembered. And while he never asked for thanks, the world gave it anyway, not with awards, but with changed lives, changed minds, and a seat that will never be empty. The bench at Gate 27 remains there to this day. Simple, peaceful, and always open, just like the man who inspired it.